E3 press conferences, by their nature, tend to be these really awkward things where middle-aged businessmen stand in front of the world and hype up teaser trailers full of gore and violence. It's sort of like having your dad stand up in front of your family before introducing a snuff film or something, or a high school principal who seems a little too enthusiastic about how badass it's going to be to have a class watch Saving Private Ryan to learn about World War II. There's a tension between the respect commanded by people in suits and the revulsion demanded by people's heads on pikes that you just don't get anywhere else short of visiting Vlad the Impaler. And yet at the Sony press conference, sandwiched between the gritty werewolf man-shoots of The Order 1886 and the pulpy Saturday morning cartoon superhero world of Infamous Second Son, Sony announced Entwined. It's a game about a fish and a crane as two forlorn lovers from different worlds doomed to never be together. The presentation showed no combat and not even much of a narrative, just a symbolic relationship explored through mechanics and metaphor. It's the sort of thing that's right up a pretentious critic's alley, so of course I downloaded it as soon as I could. And ever since I finished playing it, I've been wrestling with whether not liking this game makes me even more pretentious than I thought, or simply not pretentious enough. I mean, the game is certainly nice enough to look at, as long as you're not sick of the orange-blue thing that's been on just about every video game cover for the past half-decade. It's got a peaceful soundtrack that flows nicely between ambient and powerfully present when needed, and the way it focuses on mechanics almost exclusively to generate meaning is something not enough games even attempt, and I strongly applaud and appreciate the effort to do so. But it just doesn't click. The immediate problem is that everything about it makes me want to play other games. Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons had a more fleshed out system for controlling two entities at once using a dual analog controller. Dyad had a more rewarding set of mechanics for judging a player's ability to fly down a tube, and it also dealt thematically with pair bonds and togetherness. And if you're looking for an artsy, symbol-heavy game about flying down a set path in a bit of a trance while procedurally spicing up a soundtrack, play Rez. Entwined seems heavily influenced by these titles, or at the very least is thinking along very similar lines to what makes each of them special, but it can't seem to find any of its own ground to stand on. I take that back. It's not that the game lacks identity, it's that anything that feels genuinely unique to this game doesn't quite land. Perhaps the easiest example to cite would be the end-of-level dragon flights. After completing a level, which Entwined calls a lifetime, the fish and the crane merge together to form a dragon that is free to fly in all directions. In some sense, I really get what they're going for here. After being told strictly where to go in a straight line down a tunnel while apart from one another, these end-of-level sequences bring the two characters together to soar freely in any direction they want. It's beautiful, abstract, ludic poetry, really. Maybe the dragon is their union in the afterlife now that their quote-unquote lifetime is over. Or maybe the dragon is representative of the beauty their relationship could achieve if only the fates would allow it. Or maybe the dragon reflects on the previous level's adventures themselves, suggesting it's the beauty of their struggle to be together itself that the game celebrates. Which actually makes sense given that the dragon's appearance changes based on how you did during the level. It's literally the culmination of their yearning. But this is where game feel or kinesthetics matter. It doesn't feel free. The range of motion is too limited. You don't have 6 degrees of freedom, but a narrow cone of directions to nudge the dragon in as it flies. And since you have to collect nodes and find the exit in these endgame segments, I decidedly felt less skilled, graceful, and expressive than I did in the tunnel. The way the game feels works against so much of what it's clearly trying to achieve in these segments, and that's a major bummer. And I normally wouldn't care so much about game feel. It's hard to do well, and a lot of games don't really benefit from the effort. No one's complaining about the game feel in actual sunlight, for example. But it's literally the very tool that was being used to evoke an emotion here, so I think the criticism holds. It's just too confining to feel free, or celebratory, or expressive, which seems like what they were going for by removing the tunnel and encouraging skywriting. Another key problem is that the only reason I know these two symbols are lovers is that the game tells me up front in exposition. I get the together forever but still apart thing. That comes from the mechanics naturally. They're stuck next to one another but still operating independently. They're forever beside one another but never moving as one unit, at least until the afterlife segment. They are bound together but they are separate. But what binds them thematically is supposed to be love, a longing to be together, a sense that there is an understanding between them worth going through all these lifetimes of unquenched desire for. But that doesn't really come through, at least not until the climax of 5 minutes of gameplay. Once both characters have their energy meters filled, they can then try to reach the end of the lifetime, and it's then they start feeling linked. The failure of one can be kept alive by the success of the other. The iconography at the top of the screen as the two characters draw ever closer and closer, and the quickening pace of the game as these two interact and then release as the two come together into one. It could almost be read as suggestive. And that part makes them feel connected and dependent and in love. But that comes after 3 to 5 minutes of this. Brothers sold its premise on the idea that the two needed each other, that the big, strong brother and the small, nimble brother could each do things the other couldn't. They were fundamentally two parts of a whole, each incomplete without the other, and that's what made their relationship resonate. Here, the bulk of gameplay is these two avatars flying next to, but largely indifferent to, one another. And for a game so based on mechanics, it needed a mechanic to sell their love. It's also a game that's weirdly punishing, and I don't mean that in a it's too hard or it ruins the fun kind of way. I mean that its use of minor loss states upsets the game's overall tone. Love isn't black and white. Adoration and understanding aren't measured by success or failure. A game about these two characters and eternal yearning should be a game about fungible game states and flexible mechanics. Like reaching the speed of light, it should feel like I could push ever harder and get ever closer, but mathematically just cannot get there no matter how much I wish I could. Love as a systemic asymptote. Instead, the game lets you collect pellets to power up your energy bars, then lets you pass through one or more gates to keep that energy. The first character to miss a gate immediately fails that chain of gates for both characters and then loses some energy. It's an oddly strict binary loss condition for a game that otherwise is all about abstract ideas and no real concept of winning or losing or score. But then you continue filling up your energy bars until you can trigger their union. You can't really lose. As Will O'Neill put it, your punishment for losing in Entwined is that you have to keep playing Entwined. It's the sort of do-it-again stupid mechanic you see when you die in the middle of a first-person shooter and have to replay a segment until you do it right, except applied to an abstract game that isn't really about skill. So this approach to loss feels harsh and punitive with its immediate judgment and finality, but it also doesn't carry any meaningful consequences for the relationship of the fish and the crane. All of this combines to make the game sort of a mess that doesn't convey the game's core concepts. It doesn't feel like a game about longing or desire or love. It feels like a game that keeps asking me to repeat analog stick patterns until I can prove that a fish and a bird can make a dragon. And so I go back to my original complaint. If you really want a meaningful interaction between two entities with one controller, Brothers excels where this game confuses. If you want meaningfully rewarding success states, failure states, and skill judgments while sliding down a tube, Dyad has this game beat, and Rez remains a much higher watermark for formalist approaches to game meaning with mechanics and abstract symbols. It's just frustrating because you can systemize how relationships work. From Brothers to The Passage to The Sims to The Walking Dead, you can systemize what it means to be in a relationship with someone in ways that feel real, that feel relevant to your life experiences. And that's probably the biggest flaw in the way this game approaches its subject matter. It doesn't ring true emotionally. Its approach makes sense on paper, the yellow and blue making the green dragon, the two characters locked together but forever on their own sides of the tunnel, the sudden freedom when they're truly brought together, the repeated lifetimes, each showing a theme or tone or challenge the pair faced. Symbolically, it works. It all makes sense. You could easily write an academic paper about what this game is trying to do. But it doesn't touch me, it doesn't engage me in an emotional level, even as it prods me intellectually. All the ludic poetry and clever metaphors in the world can't save a game about love that doesn't, at least in some small way, make me feel that love too.